Welcome back to the Dr. SuperCoach YouTube. You are on with Pig and I am very excited. I'm excited for two reasons. First, the bye rounds are over. It makes me very happy to have all of our players available, all the teams back that can be targeted for matchups. As a result, I recommend thinking big with your captaincy. And secondly, and more importantly, the SuperCoach community has been given a big gift in the last week from the legends at DFS Australia. For those of you that don't know, DFS Australia is an amazing resource where you can check out all kinds of fantasy and SuperCoach data. I use them really heavily for my captaincy research and just my team in general. But up until now, we've only had positional matchup data for fantasy scoring. So when I've been quoting, the easiest matchup for ruckman or they've got a hard matchup for midfielders, that has been based on fantasy scoring because that is all the data we had available to us. But that has changed. DFS Australia now has SuperCoach matchup difficulty data. And, some of it is similar. St Kilda are the easiest matchup for designated kickers in both SuperCoach and fantasy, but there are some important differences. So that makes me very excited because we now have the best data possibly available to make the best possible recommendations. So my captain recommendations, they've been going very well this year using fantasy data. So hopefully we can turn it up a notch further using SuperCoach data. So thanks very much to the guys over at DFS Australia. I would recommend that everyone listening goes and checks out their website. If you're feeling generous or thankful, you can always donate $5 and buy the Legends a coffee because they spend a lot of time and money of their own giving us this incredible data, this great resource for free. So that's something that's really, really excited me. Now, getting back to captaincy, with all 18 teams available and this SuperCoach matchup data now, I'm no longer accepting 120 VC scores. I'm looking bigger. I've talked about this before, but for those of you new to my channel, my preference is to VC the player who I think will be the highest scorer in my team. So I don't want to VC a 125 and be pressured into whether I take that or not, if I think there's still a 140 to come. The caveat with that is that you do need a safe 120 player to fall back on that plays after your VC, and you also need a loophole to make it work. For example, this week, if you thought a Port player, say Dan Houston, was going to be your highest scorer of the round, I'd actually be okay with leaving my VC until Sunday to put it on him. If I had a player that was confident to do a 120 after, like you might be really confident in Elliot Yeo, and if you got a loophole, you might have Con Livingston. So, look, not everyone wants to play that way. If you like to use your VC or C for two chances at a safe 120, that is absolutely fine. But personally, I love the rush of shooting for a 150 VC, even if they play later in the round. Like, I've used a VC on a Sunday before, and if I've got a backup, I'm quite happy to do that. If I think they're going to be my highest scorer in my team. Last week, I vice-captained LDU because I thought he was going to be my highest scorer, and he netted me a brilliant 148. So I took that and ran. Very happy with that. Now for this week, we've got all our 18 teams available. Again, I'm going to give you 9 recommendations. There's so many options now. There's some with not amazing matchups, but still, we got all our big dogs back. So let's go. VC number 3 is Marcus Bontempelli. Marcus just keeps making his way into my captaincy videos despite some tough matchups. And here he is again. A game against North Melbourne might look nice on paper, but the Kangaroos are actually quite a restrictive midfield over the last 5 games. Their recent form of nearly winning games has coincided with them stopping opposition midfielders. However, the Bont's recent form, with a 3-round average of 149, cannot be denied. The second best SuperCoach scorer over that time, and he also has a monster 169 the last time he played North. So Bont needs to be in our considerations this week. And to his credit, he has scored 162, 99 and 183, so that's that 3-round average I'm talking about. They were actually in fairly difficult matchups. So a genuine gun that someone we shouldn't ignore just because he has a tough opponent. I personally don't believe Will Phillips will tag the Bont. I mean, just looking at them, he looks like he's half his size. And if he does, I'm sure Bont will just take him forward and kick a bag. So I probably expect Phillips, if he does tag, it'll probably more likely go to Libba or Richards. And I expect Marcus Bontempelli to run free. My number 2 VC option is Dane Zorko. It's time to bring the Dane. 141 against St Kilda a fortnight ago. They're the easiest matchup for designated kickers. He was on 100 at half time. That was a real what could have been. This week, the matchup is with the Melbourne Demons, who are the 3rd easiest matchup for designated kickers. So the good run for Zorko continues. And a return to the Gabba is exactly what we want for a VC spike score, a venue he is averaging 137 points at this season. Or, if you want me to entice you even further, a venue that he is averaging 154 over his last 3 games at the Gabba. That is insanity. Zach Fisher just had 108 against Melbourne as a designated kicker. That's a little bit above his season average. But the week prior, Jeremy Howe, Braden Maynard and John Noble all scored, 25%, 29% and 15% above their recent form against the Demons. So if Zorko does what Maynard did and scores 29% above his recent form, I want to be on that VC train. This could be a big score. But my number 1 VC option, if you have him, is Lachie Neale. Lachie Neale, Friday night, Gabba. I don't need to say anything else, do I? Well, I will. The Demons are the 6th easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games, and I believe that data isn't truly accurate yet, as it hasn't had time to adjust and reflect the lack of Christian Petrarca. I recommended 2 North Melbourne players last week against this week in Demons midfield, and they both dominated. Remember, I recommended LDU, and he popped off for that massive 148, and I recommended Harry Sheasel, and he had a 117. Actually, probably should have been bigger, but he didn't do much at the end. In addition to that, they also allowed Wardlaw to pop up for a 122 and Jai Simpkin to have 114. So I genuinely believe Melbourne are in shambles right now. I think that this very strong Brisbane midfield that dominate at home, I think they'll have a field day in this one. So if you own Josh Dunkley or Hugh McCluggage, I also think they are great options. But I am recommending Lachie Neale because he seems to have the best ceiling out of all of them. Neale's averaging 125 at the Gabba this season, and that includes a tag 70. I believe it was more like mid-130s before that. I genuinely think this game will be a blowout and all midfielders for Brisbane will dominate. Now we go to my point of difference. Vice captain or captain, I'm pretty comfortable with either for this guy this week. My pod VCs are averaging 155 over the last 6 weeks. That's so good. That's after the monster 176 from Tom de Koning last round. So there's a bit of pressure now for me to keep it up. So I'm going to go with a player that has treated me very well last year, Rowan Marshall. Port Adelaide are the 3rd easiest matchup for Ruckman over the last 5 games, and Roma is one of the big dogs that can take advantage of an easy matchup. He already has 3 scores over 145 this year, despite having a down season compared to 2023. Look, Marshall did only score 63 against Port in round 7. I believe that was the one where he got injured in the first quarter and then kind of just limped to the finish line. He managed to play out the game and his owners were lucky for him to get a 67. That will turn a lot of people off. Like he's in 8% of teams. I feel like his 8% of owners will look at that and be scared of that, but you have to remember he was injured in the first quarter. I'm going to rule that one out and not count it. What I am going to count is when he scored 159 last year against Port at the same venue at Marvel Stadium. Whether it is Soldo, Sweet or Vicentini, I back Marshall to dominate them at a ground he loves. Remember, Rowan Marshall finished the 2023 season with scores of 149, 122, 113, 118, 146 and 141 in his last 6 games at Marvel last year. Coming off a rest, I would not be surprised to see Tom Campbell drop to allow Marshall to go solo. As you know, I record this before teams are announced, so pay attention to that. But whether Campbell is in or out, I don't really care. It doesn't really worry me for Rowan. I think he's going bonkers in this one. To look at it, McInerney scored a 126, Briggs a 117, De Koning a 140, and Cherry a 119. they've all got the recent ruckman to play against Port. They've all gone well above their average in this matchup with the power. In fact, Briggs and De Koning added about 30% to their recent form. Look, granted, Marshall's recent form isn't amazing, but if he adds 30% to it, you're looking at an easy 130 in this game. Then we'll go to my captains. My number 5 captain is Jack Sinclair. A 3-round average of 128, and now a matchup with the 3rd easiest team to score against for attacking defenders. I love this for Jack. In under 10% of teams, he isn't highly owned, but if you do own him, I think he will reward you handsomely this week. 113 and 109 in his last 2 meetings with Port, and that was despite them being more restrictive on those occasions. Port have really opened up recently to the fact where Whitfield had 134 on them recently. That's kind of the only similar player to Jack Sinclair that I could find that's gone well against Port in recent weeks. Port kind of haven't faced many of those really good attacking defenders of their calibre. So, Whitfield's our main data point, but I'm really, really keen for this matchup. A return to Marvel Stadium is always a good thing for Jack Sinclair. Last year, in 2023, he averaged 111 at Marvel Stadium, as opposed to 100 at other venues. So he clearly prefers playing at home. And now he has 8 of his 9 final matches at that venue, starting this week with a great matchup. I think it's a really, really nice option. Then captain number 4 is Toby Nankervis. Toby Nankervis is averaging 131 points in his last 3 games. A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. That has come from matchups with what I call 3 easy opponents. Well, this week's he gets a very easy opponent. Tom De Koning. Tom De Koning is in a hot streak of his own. He's dominating SuperCoach, but he's also allowing his ruck opponents to dominate. TDK has allowed SDK, his brother Sam, to score a 135. He allowed Goldstein to get a 108, Soldo to get a 92, and Witts to get a 127. So they've all scored really well against Carlton since TDK has been the solo ruck. That actually equates to Carlton being the 2nd easiest matchup for opposition ruckmen over the last 5 games. So this recommendation of Toby Nankervis probably goes out the window if Pitnet is named, but I would expect Carlton to let TDK keep flying solo until he gives them a reason not to, and that bodes well for Toby Nankervis as a very, very safe fallback captain on Sunday. He's not very highly owned. He's only in 1% of teams, but this is especially, I own him in a few draft leagues, so Nank is going to be my captain everywhere in draft. If you've got him in Classic, awesome, have a crack. My number 3 captain option is Dan Houston. Dan the man. Houston comes into this game with a 3-round average of 125, which is heavily buoyed by that 174 against the Giants. Now, a matchup with the easiest opponent for designated kickers and the easiest opponent for general defenders? Look out. Dane Zorko, 141, Darcy Wilmot, 119, Sam Flanders, 152, Joel Jeffrey, 121. They all carry the designated kicker tag, just like Houston, and they all scored 25% or more on top of their current form. So if Dan Houston, who's Port's main designated kicker, scores 25% more than his current form, you're looking at a 143. The question here is not about his ceiling, but rather his floor. Can you trust Houston with the captaincy, given he doesn't play until Sunday? 4 of his last 7 scores are under 100, which does give me some pause. But if he plays how we think he should play, given the favourable matchup, he should do very well for you. This game being played at Marvel Stadium should work in his favour. The closed roof is generally better for those that rely on kicking and marking for scoring. That's what Houston does. Dan hasn't played at Marvel yet, but his 3 games there last year led to scores of 110, 47 and 176. So that highlights his ceiling and his floor. This pick is not without risk, but it is a very fun one with a big chance of going big. Then my number 2 captain option is Zach Merritt. Now, I want to note something here. I have been quoting that Geelong are the easiest matchup for inside midfielders. I've been saying that all year. And they are, if we look at fantasy data. which, as I said, that was all we had to go off using the DFS website until this week. Now that we have SuperCoach data available to us, this shows that in SuperCoach, Geelong are actually a slightly restrictive matchup. So that'll be something to watch going forward. Despite that, I'm still backing in Zach Merrett for a big game. Much like I spoke about with Bont earlier, you still have to back some of the best players despite bad matchups sometimes. And Merrett has shown he can break a tag with elite running. He scored a 125 and a 135 in his last 2 games despite being tagged. And if we look at recent inside midfielders against Geelong, Matt Kennedy scored a 116, Sam Walsh scored a 110, George Hewitt scored a 96, Isaac Heaney scored a 116. All of those guys outperformed their recent form. The ones that didn't outperform their recent form were Patrick Cripps with a 99 and Chad Warner with a 98. But I went back and looked at it. They both had 6 clangers in those games, and they were penalised heavily by the SuperCoach scoring system. Zach Merrett is such a good user of the footy that I don't expect him to drop a bad score due to skill error. The only risk here, there is an O'Connor or a Blitzarv's tag risk, but Zach has shown in his last 2 games that he just breaks tag at the moment just with outrunning his opponent. So I think this should be a really, really safe, nice fullback captaincy option. I do like this one. But then my number 1 captaincy option is Nick Dacos. Nick Dacos is back from his bye, and that makes me happy. He had a 5-round average of 138 prior to that Melbourne tag, and then he bounced back with a 129 in the game after that, despite being tagged by North. That is the risk with Nick Dacos. He's so good that teams are always looking to tag him. But Gold Coast haven't been tagging midfielders lately. They do have Took and Rao that they could use, but they seem to be backing them to go head-to-head rather than a specific run-with role. And as a result, the Suns are actually the second easiest matchup for inside midfielders over the last 5 games. Some recent scores against them include the Freo Trio, that was nearly a tongue twister, the Freo Trio of Brayshaw, he scored a 134, Young scored a 130, and Sarong scored a 121. So the Freo Trio all dominated against the Suns. But even before that, you can look at some lesser players like Paddy Dow, Archie Perkins, George Hewitt, Matt Kennedy. They've all exceeded their recent form by a fair margin when playing the Suns, so they have been giving up scores. The main flags are that they have limited some of the good guys, like they limited Jack Steele and they limited Zach Merrett to just below tons, so that is obviously a risk. For that reason, I think I'd prefer Dacos as a VC rather than a C, but I'm still expecting him to score regardless. One thing here that is awesome, 149 and 143 are Dacos' scores, the only 2 times he's played at People's First Stadium. So maybe a week off and a trip to the Gold Coast is the recipe for prime Dacos. There we go. So just to recap that, there's a few, I guess, like riskier half-back guys like Dan Houston and Jack Sinclair that I think have really, really good matchups. Zach Merrett and Bont, they've got harder matchups, but I think they'll still do really, really well. I love targeting these 2 Brisbane boys at the Gabba, especially against Melbourne. Lachie Neale and Dane Zorko, I think they're honestly going nuts. If you have one of them, they should be in your plans. I think Rowan Marshall is a big, big chance here for a bounce back and is my pod recommendation. I think he's just going to monster whoever Port used in the ruck. Toby Nankervis, not many own him. I own him in draft. A lot of people obviously will own him in draft, so I think he's a really, really safe option. And yeah, Nick Dacos, also a tag risk, but I think he's just going to go really, really well this week. So summing all that up, I don't own Lachie Neale. If I own Lachie Neale, I think he would be my VC, but I don't, so I'm going to vice-captain Dane Zorko. I think Zorko could be my highest score of the round, and as I spoke about earlier, I want to VC the guy who I think is going to be my highest scorer. It just so happens he plays the first game, and that is absolutely perfection. I love that. But, you know, if he wasn't playing till Saturday night, I'd still save it for him. I will then fall back on either Bont or Dacos. I haven't decided which yet. It'll depend on how I'm feeling. I feel like Bont's maybe a little bit safer because I think the tag's probably not going to come to him. But I'm just so confident that Zorko puts out a big VC. I don't think I'm going to have to worry about that. I think I'm going to be able to put my feet up after Friday night and relax for the weekend. That's all from me. Now remember, every week it'll be coming out Thursdays is the weekly article I'm doing for Code Sports. So if you have a Code Sports subscription, you want to support me there, go over and have a look at that. If you prefer reading the captain's articles as opposed to listening to my voice, that's always an option to sign up with Code Sports. I think I saw on Twitter they've got a real good special at the moment. Might have been $1 for a month or something. Anyway, I'm not necessarily plugging that. But if you want to read, that's always an option. So that should be coming out Thursday. As always, I'll be posting that on Twitter, tweeting that, so you'll be able to find that. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and I just hope you have a really, really good weekend at SuperCoach. Hope you have a good weekend in general in life, but especially in SuperCoach, and I hope your VC goes bonkers and you don't even have to worry about a captain.